Well, good evening, beloved, and welcome to Grace United Methodist Church. I'm Pastor Katie Nix. I'm the pastor here. We're so glad to invite one of our favorite partners, the Carver Connection, to us this evening. I want to begin tonight with confession. I think it's a very important thing to do, especially during Holy Week. When Shelley approached me about hosting an event, during Holy Week, and I will give you points, she asked very nicely before I flipped out at the idea. And she said, we're going to bring in this author named Gary. And I went, okay. She goes, you don't know Gary? I said, no. So I went over to Professor Abram. I was like, it's Gary, somebody's coming to my church. And he's like, have you read Wednesday Wars? I was like, what? He goes, trust me, go out and buy it. I stand before you, ladies and gentlemen, and siblings of God, a true convert. This was an amazing book. I read it in 3 hours, and that includes the 20 minutes in the car where I got car sick because I couldn't stop because it was so good. My husband wants to talk to you about that one, Mr. Gary, and how we had to clean up the van afterwards. But tonight is going to be just a fantastic treat. We are so glad that you are here. Normally, I would say if you have smaller ones who might have trouble sitting still, we've got activity areas, books, things over there. I don't think you'll have any problem being entertained tonight. One, because I'm not preaching, but two, because I think it's going to be a wonderful evening of conversations. And so with that, I'm going to open us up with prayer as we begin this evening. Let us pray together. Holy God, we are always grateful for the different ways that we can connect with you. Sometimes it is Sunday morning through things that feel familiar, and sometimes it's through a book that just catches us off guard and makes us smile. God, tonight as we come into this place to learn how all of our gifts are able to be used by you, from silly jokes to writing to just being together in this place, we ask, Holy Spirit, that you open our eyes to something new. It is in your name we pray. Amen. One last thing I want to let you all know, if you would like to come back on Friday evening in our Christian calendar, it is Good Friday. Here in this sanctuary, we're going to be hosting the Ariana String Quartet, which is one of the well-known quartets here in St. Louis. They're going to be performing Haydn's 7 Last Words, and it comes with modern meditations and different pieces written for it. So I just thought, not everyone has plans for Good Friday. You are welcome to come here. I assume you all will have great plans for Easter. Obviously, you're welcome here, but I hope you go wherever you call home for Easter. So with that, I am to introduce to you Professor Abram Van Engen. Did I do that right? You're just Abram, yeah. Apparently, he's got a lot of titles, but you just need to know that English is his thing, and that he is going to introduce our speaker. So with that, let us welcome the director, right? Director of the Carver Connection? The guy who's a big deal, Abram.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you. This church has been a welcome home for us in the Carver Project, and I think I'm getting some serious. Should I move? You need me to move. You want me back here? Right here is good. All right. I'm going to stand right here. This church has been a wonderful home for us. We started the Carver Project. John and Azu founded the Carver Project almost 6 years ago. And right away, we made a connection with Grace United Methodist Church because we're a kitty corner from them at WashU there. And they have been just wonderful to us and have opened their space to us and given us a place to have an office. I'm going to keep moving around so I'm not echoing too bad. And it's just been wonderful to be here. I got a couple of announcements to make, and then I'm going to introduce Gary. So here are the announcements. The first thing is that you'll see this program, Writing as a Sacramental Act, and in the bottom you'll see a QR code, and that's a way for you with your phone to ask questions tonight. So Gary's going to give a talk for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to sit in those chairs and have a conversation. I have a few questions, but to be honest, I didn't prepare a lot of questions because when I thought of Gary coming, I thought of just throwing snowballs at him in New England. And it was hard to get back around to to thinking through the seriousness of coming up with some very serious and deep questions for you. So I hope you do take advantage of that and send me questions, and I will ask your questions of Gary here later tonight. I do have a few questions, though, if you don't have any of your own. So that's on this sheet. The other sheet here is about some events that we have coming up. And the main one here is the bottom one, the Carver Conversation, which is our annual big event where we bring in 3 speakers and have this wonderful conversation together. And this year, continuing the theme of tonight, it's going to be on childlike faith, the art of translating the gospel to all ages. And you can see the 3 wonderful speakers there on the program. That's April 26th, and we do hope you come out for that. That's a wonderful event every year. So that is coming up as well. If you want to know more about Carver, please do check out online carverstl.org, and we do a lot of programs and a lot of events. We have a lot of things online, so every one of these talks that we've done, and we've done many of these talks, we film them and we make them available online. So if you've missed any of these talks in the past, they are well worth looking at, watching, going to see. The other thing that we have on that website that is worth your while, especially for those of you in different churches looking for some church programs on Sunday mornings, is that we made 5 different series of videos for small groups and church schools and so on, and they all cover all different topics from the point of view of the expertise of the faculty member involved. So for example, I sat in this wonderful church over here with a big video crew, and we made a series of videos about how and why to read poetry and why the church ought to be particularly invested in this art. And so those videos are online and you can find them there. And so I encourage you to check that out. So now let me introduce our speaker tonight, Gary D. Schmidt. 20 years ago, I graduated, 21 years ago, I graduated from Calvin. And when I graduated, I had to give a little talk, and Gary introduced me for that talk. And instead of the usual introduction, he wrote a letter to me, which he read out. And that letter ended with a charge. And so I wanted to begin tonight by reading to you the charge that Gary gave to me. I'm going to read it back to you. This is the charge you gave to me when you introduced me. There go all my papers. 20 years ago. This is what Gary charged me with. Be one of those writers for whom our denomination and tradition longs. Be the writer who tells the truth with beauty excelling. Be the writer who shows us what we have known yet have forgotten, and help us to come to it again. And be the writer who does this from a faith that does not confine, but that gives you the place to breathe. From a faith that does not bear down, but that brings shurasuta. From a faith that does not negate the writer's imagination, but that compels it. Ezra Pound says that a book is a ball of fire we hold in the palm of our hand. Burn brightly. And I read that to you because, Gary, you don't know this, but I have kept that charge near me for 20 years now, and I have thought about it since in everything that I've written. And when I think about that charge that you gave me 20 years ago and my desire to fulfill that charge, to live up to that charge, to live into that charge, I often think of you and your writing. And I think of wanting to be the kind of writer that you have always been, and the kind of writer that you were for me when we met. And you have done so much writing. So here's the place where I'm going to list some of that writing for you. Gary is the best-selling author of The Labors of Hercules Beale, Just Like That, the National Book Award finalist for OK for Now, Pay Attention, Carter Jones, Orbiting Jupiter, the Newbery Honor and Prince Honor book, Lizzie Bright and the Buckminster Boy, the Newbery Honor book, The Wednesday Wars, and many, many others, which, by the way, they're just outside here. And afterwards, you can buy a copy and have it signed, which I encourage you to do. But beyond the writing, which is amazing and impressive, and the reason why we're gathered here tonight, Gary is also a mentor. He's been a mentor to me for a long time. He's the kind of mentor who showed me all around New England in the dead of winter, one January, as we went from one writer's house to another and tracked through some seriously frozen streets of Concord. And we circled Walden Pond, and we tracked up the stairs in Hawthorne's house to see the one and only manuscript of the Scarlet Letter. And some people teared up. I can say from experience that Gary Schmidt is one of a kind. You'll be hard-pressed to find a renowned writer with honors and awards and books upon books who is also, frankly, just a decent, good, genuinely wonderful human being. Introductions are supposed to list honors, and I should probably go into more of them, but the greatest honor of a good life, I have always been told, is to live in such a way that God might say at the end of it, "Well done, good and faithful servant." And when God says that at the end of someone's life, I don't imagine him really looking through someone's CV to say it. I imagine God caring about the way that we showed care to one another. And I am the happy recipient of the care that Gary has always shown. One of many angsty, dark, and doubting college students who Gary took seriously, shaping me and shaping us and turning us back to the light, burning brightly for us when we needed it most. And we're here tonight to hear about Gary and Gary's writing, but I just wanted you all to know, and you especially, Gary, that the story of my life, when we think about Gary's writing, the story of my life has in part been written by Gary Schmidt, and it's an honor to have you here tonight. Gary?
You're amazing. Any questions? Thank you. I've been here a few days now, and there's so many people I owe thanks to. Abram, the entire Carver Project, Shelley, Nancy is somewhere, I think. Yeah, Nancy and Joe. I mean, just so many folks that have been so kind, and it has been so wonderful to be a part of this. So, and thank you for coming out on a cold night. This is a perfect Michigan night, but I think it's a little cold for you guys, right? So, wow. One of the nice things about writing for young readers is that they will occasionally send you letters. I've never written back to an adult writer, but I have, or a writer for adults, but I have written occasionally when I was a kid to an author that I loved. And every so often I get them, so I thought I would read you a couple. You guys up for this? This is from Caitlin Jones. Hello, Caitlin Jones here. I just wanted to say thank you very much. I've never met an author before. I thought you did a pretty good job on First Boy. I'm not sure my book is even that good. When I grew up, I wanted to be a book writer since I already have 27 pages written by hand. That's no small thing, right? 27 pages. I was wondering if I sent my book to you, would you be able to look it over without taking any ideas? Not to be mean about the idea thing, but I don't really know you. If you could please write and let me know. Before I finish this letter, this is from Andrew, I want to let you know a little bit about me. My name is Andrew. I'm 10 years old. I'm in 5th grade. I love reading and writing and all of that. In all of your busy work, it might be hard to get back to me, but I hope that you can do it by Thursday of this week. Also, please make it a written letter, not a letter that you send to everyone who sends you fan mail. It's for a school project, and I want to get a good grade. This is honesty. I mean, right? I was wondering if I could have your next book for free. I know what you're thinking. Why should I give the free book to this kid? Well, I'd be happy to spread your name so you will make more money. This kid is an agent in the making, right? So if you're willing to accept my offer, I'd be happy to help you with any other books that you're going to write, like giving you titles, characters, and ideas, or anything you can think of. Thank you so much, Alicia. I didn't write back to that, particularly one part. Dear, this is from Heather. I'm exactly 38 pages into your book, Orbiting Jupiter, and I just wanted to say, why? The dog. Oh, geez, dude, you killed the dog. And this is my favorite sentence. I'm sitting in my first period English class on a nice warm Friday, not expecting any emotional turmoil, at least until third hour. And you just drop a cute yellow dog's death like it's nothing? I am going to finish this book, but if one more dog dies, especially randomly, I'm going to be very upset. This is from Joshua. You won the Newbery Award, so obviously your book was well liked. But overall, I think it was kind of mediocre. In my opinion, there were some well-written parts that I admired. And now here's the sentence, watch this. Then there were the childish parts which weren't to my fancy. Now, no one has said to my fancy since 1911, but Joshua had that in there. I enjoyed your talk yesterday. My favorite part was when you talked about the World War II story. When I get home, I'm going to tell my friend Alex about it. I hope you come again in a few years because my little brother wants to meet you. I hope I come too. I'm going to keep this letter until I meet her little brother. I'm in 8th grade, and my language arts teacher asked us for our book report to read a book by a living author, to research the author, and then to write them a letter. I picked yours because the book I had in my hand was the smallest one I could find. Sorry if you take offense at that because I said your book was small, but the truth is I can't read long books because I have a short attention span. So I don't normally finish them. But I did finish Orbiting Jupiter. That book was really good. That's kind of a neat letter, right? I mean, it doesn't start so well, but it comes. This is from Ethan. I like your style of writing because you use a lot of beautiful. Isn't that lovely? I use a lot of beautiful. I also like how you use personification. Here's one that I wrote. The wind tapping me on the shoulder as it felt as cold as a ghost. Your books make me feel like I can do anything. That's a line you keep. Now, I will ask more questions and tell you about myself. This is from Kyle. How often do you write? I write every day at school. Yeah. Where do you write? I write at school and at home. Where do you get your ideas? I get mine from books and games. How do you get published? There's the question, right? I self-publish every story I write. Do you have any suggestions for a young writer? I need tips, and here's the thing, guys. I need tips to write softly. I don't know what that means, but isn't it lovely? I want tips on how to write softly. What made you become a writer yourself? I thought it was going to be fun. I really liked your book, and I liked the characters. The character was Danny Hupfer. He was brave, and he was courageous. I wish I could be like Danny Hupfer. That's the whole letter. This is from Genevieve. I try to envision what my life would be like if my parents hadn't split or remarried and I hadn't changed schools. I think about all the pointless fights, the deafening silence I hear every day at home. Think about the names I hear myself called at school. Would it be worth anything, or would I be even more pain than I was when my parents got divorced? I know that nothing will ever be the same again, but maybe everything turned out for the better, even if it didn't seem like that at the time. Maybe the things I went through made me a better person. I may not always be okay, but I think I'm okay for now. Dear Mr. Schmidt, I enjoyed your talk and showing up. I just enjoyed you showing up. My favorite story was not the story that you started with, but the story you were told us about the kids that were incarcerated. Hopefully I spelt that right. It was really something to me. It was touching to me because I had a friend that was sent to JDC, so juvenile detention, for a year when he was just 12. We do that in America. 12 years old. And this happened while I was in Mexico. And when he went to jail, I had to go down there for a while. So one day when I was by myself, I got a text from his family from Facebook saying that he was a victim of suicide and that I could attend the funeral if I wanted to. I never got the chance to go to his funeral, but they told me that after he got out of JDC that he was just gone mentally. He was just numb, and that made him not happy, not sad, but empty and fearful of ever going back there. He was just so unhappy, and he just committed suicide. I felt like it was my fault. Felt like it was my fault. And I never wanted to grieve or remember it. But when you talked about the kids in prison, it made me think of him. I cried. I never thought a book or a story could make me cry so much. But I'm glad you helped me. It released some of the grief and some of the sorrow I kept inside me. The reason I love and favor that story you told us about the kid prisoners is because of that. I appreciate you took the time to talk to us. J.R. He wouldn't send his full name. And one more. My name is James. I'm in 8th grade. For our class, we had to read a book with more than 150 pages. I opened your book and read the inside cover. I thought I would hate it, because Cooper does not even have a dog. That's great. The fact that Cooper's grandfather died helped me relate to Cooper. When I was 5 years old, my mother came into my room at 10 p.m., bawling. She mustered up the courage to tell me that my grandfather had died, the same grandfather I had shared apricot pinwheels with less than 8 hours before. When I found out Cooper's grandfather had died, I had to set the book down. I let it sit on the coffee table for 2 days before I even tried to pick it up again. I was able to keep reading all the way through the book. I have to say I really liked it, even though I'm not much of a reader. I really enjoyed reading your book, and now watch this, guys. And it helped me realize that all things have to leave us one time or another. It's from James Zolke. And this is the last one. This is from Leo. Overall, all of your books have some connection to a middle schooler during a war in real life. Loss of a person, loss of a friend. Howling made everything sad, and that was true. But there is always hope in them that they will prevail and overcome their obstacles by the end of the book. And now the sentence, which is if I had one review my whole life, this would be it. That is why I like your books and why they are interesting and enjoyable to read, because your books understand me. Your books understand me. That was worth it. When I think about those letters and what they mean to me, and when I get them, how I store them away like this, I think, yeah, this is why it's worth it. This is why I do what I do. Why you worry about rejections, why you worry about how long it takes, why you worry about, am I going to find a ribbon for my 1953 typewriter, and all those sorts of things. But certainly it seems to me that when I read those, it feels to me like we've made connections. That this kid that's written this letter and this old fart me, who's so far away from childhood, have somehow found a way to be together. And I guess that's kind of what I wanted to talk a little bit about tonight, what that means and how it works, at least the way I see it here. And I've framed that by thinking about writing as a sacrament. And that actually comes from an event at a small bookstore called Books of Wonder in New York City, when I am sitting there with several other writers waiting for the doors to open, and we're going to have signings with all of that. While we were doing that, while we were waiting, we somehow turned on to the topic of what did you used to be religiously? I have no idea how we got there, but we did. And it turned out that everyone there was what they called a lapsed Catholic. And it became a sort of joke almost. Oh yeah, me too. Oh yeah, you are too. Well, me are too. Until it came to me, who is not a lapsed Catholic. And just as we got to that, the doors opened and the signings began. All the way through, it was really, really tight. A lot of people. And at the end, when things begin to sort of peter out and the time is over, a guy comes running in, and he's completely out of breath, and he's got a book for each one of us to sign. He is really, really out of breath and just panting. And someone says to him, "What's the deal? Why so at the end moment here?" And he said, "I have to get this done right now because it's almost the Sabbath and I have to get home." And one of the guys next to me said, "So important?" And he goes, "Yeah, it's the Sabbath. It's a sacrament." And the three guys next to me sort of looked at me, because we had sort of been talking about this before, and they said, "Really? It really matters?" And he said to them, "Yeah, it really matters." And then he looked at me, and I said, "I'm a Calvinist. For us, everything is a sacrament. What do you think that would feel like?" And he says, "I think it would be pretty frantic after a while." And I think, yeah, I kind of think you're right. But I haven't forgotten that moment. Suppose everything was a sacrament. Suppose things that you don't normally think of as sacraments were sacraments. And so I've been thinking and musing about that for a while now, and thinking about what that might mean. And certainly one of the things that it must mean is how we think of what a sacrament should do, right? So it seems to me that among the many things, you would have to say that anything which is sacramental should somehow strengthen our relationship to God, somehow. That it should help build up not only ourselves, but others. That it should bring praise and worship into the world. That it should nourish. That it should give strength. That it should proclaim healing. And that it should proclaim grace. That it should be celebratory. That somehow a sacrament has to give us more to be human beings with, because it brings some sort of expression to the divine. That somehow a sacrament, in short, should be a visible presentation of what is normally mysterious. So, let me tell you a story, and think about how it may, on some level, do exactly that. And this is a familiar one to you. This is the story of Naaman and Elisha. It is, by the way, Elijah, not Elijah. I get those confused all the time. And if you remember the story, Naaman is this very, very powerful guy who is the second in command in the country of Aram. The king only is the one who has more power and authority than Naaman has. He is the general Petraeus of his age. He has never lost a battle, never once. And so his reputation is enormous. He has one job other than those duties, and the job is this. When the king goes to the temple of Rimnon, Naaman is beside him, and he helps the king kneel to worship, and then he helps the king up. That is his job. He must absolutely do it every day, to worship the god Rimnon at this temple. Time goes by, and one day he wakes up, and as you know the story, he discovers, unbelievably, that he has leprosy. He checks it out. It's true. It's leprosy. And he knows that in his culture, he is not going to get healed of it. And he knows that everything is gone. Everything. He won't be able to touch the king. He won't be able to show himself. He will die alone. All that wealth, all that power is ridiculous now. None of that's going to be there. He knows that that's the case. And he's desperate. But he has kind of a lot of street cred. He's been along with the king all this time. And he goes to the king, king of Aram, and tells him this horrible thing has happened. Now, how should the king of Aram respond to this, his loyal servant, all these years, second in command? How should he respond? And what he decides to do, the king of Aram, is to send him to Israel, because he's heard that there's a prophet out there, and that maybe this prophet could heal him. Naaman's pretty excited. I mean, it's a one shot. Why not be? And so he gets ready to go. And the king writes this letter to the king of Israel. And the letter says, I'm sending my servant Naaman to you to be healed. He does not read the letter before he goes. Takes the letter, gets the retinue, goes to the king of Israel, says, I'm from the king of Aram. Here's the letter. The king of Israel reads it and knows instantly that this is a crock. There is no way that this guy is going to be healed of leprosy. So what is the king of Aram doing? And the king of Aram is picking a fight, so that when the king of Israel refuses or fails, the king of Aram can say, oh my gosh, I'm going to take it out on you, and will invade. He knows that this is exactly what has done. And he takes his clothes and he tears them in two, ashes, sackcloth, all the deal. He wails because the king of Israel knows this is a setup. Naaman discovers it too. And he discovers two things. First, he's not going to be healed. Second, this most powerful man in his kingdom is now just a political pawn. That's all it is. He is reduced just to that. This king that he has served so loyally, that he's been bringing up and down, he's made him into just a pawn. And everything is gone, really gone this time. And so everything is thrown into chaos. He doesn't know what to do. What should he go home? I mean, what's next? And as it turns out, the prophet hears of him, of his need. And he calls for him to come. Naaman, come to my house. He doesn't promise anything. He just calls for him to come. And so Naaman, why not? I mean, why would you not take every opportunity, every possibility? And so he takes his retinue and goes to the small house of Elisha the prophet, who, when he shows up, doesn't bother to come to the door. He won't even come to the door. Now, how should Naaman respond? He's this powerful man, or was. He was a big guy, or was. And now, not only is he a pawn, is this a joke? Elijah won't even respond to him. He told me to come. He won't even respond. And he's angry. And he's angrier when the servant of Elisha comes to the door and says, Elisha has a message for you. Elisha has a message for you. There's this filthy river down there. It's disgusting. Go throw yourself in 7 times. What would you do? And Naaman has had it. He has just had it. And there's something noble about his response when he says, no. There's just something that is noble about that. He won't do it because he knows this is a crock. He's not going to throw himself into a filthy river 7 times. Are you kidding? He's not going to do it. And he gets the retinue together, and they're about to leave when his servant comes to him and says what is kind of an obvious thing. He goes, if he had said to you, do this really, really hard thing, you would have done it. This is an easy thing. Why not? And Naaman, yet again, decides, okay, why not? Imagine the moment. This is last straw. He walks down to a filthy river. There's no way that this can work. But he is so desperate, that he decides to do it. And so he goes down into the river and dunks himself in 7 times. And when he comes out, the text reads that his skin was as that of a young boy. He is completely healed. He can't believe it. Could you? He goes back up to Elisha's house, and this time when he knocks, Elisha shows. And he says to him, thank you. His life has been given back to him. He offers him money. He offers him silver and gold. He offers him clothing. He offers him jewelry. He offers him everything he can think of. And Elisha says, no, not interested. He doesn't need it. And then he asks, I know now that the Lord is the Lord. And I know that this Rimnon is only stone. So, he says, can I just take some dirt and bring it home so that when I worship, I can worship on the soil of Israel and I can worship God? And what is Elijah going to say? No, you can't have any dirt? No, of course. He says, sure. And so it's done. And he turns away back to the retinue with his dirt. And if the story ended there, it would be a good story. But it's not quite over. He turns back to Elisha, and he says this unbelievable question. Here's the question. He goes, my job is to worship the God of Rimnon, the God of Aram, but Rimnon, with the king. I help him down, and I help him up. We worship together. Is it okay if I keep that job? Isn't that an amazing question? Is it okay if I keep worshiping this other God? Now you imagine at that moment, Elisha, he's the Old Testament prophet, the beard, the white robe, all that sort of stuff. Don't you imagine Elisha saying, you jerk, you complete jerk. And he slaps him across the face. He says, here, have your leprosy back, idiot. Go back in your chariot. Pieces of you will fall off on the way back to Aram. Enjoy that. And when you get there, there may not be much of you left, but whatever is left will be reviled. And yeah, have a good day. You imagine that this is Elijah, but he doesn't say it. And one of the most astonishing endings to any of the Old Testament stories, he says to him, go home. Go home in peace. That's his answer. Go home in peace. What an ending. What does it say? And it seems to me it says a lot of things. That maybe it's saying the world's a complicated place. The questions we face are complicated questions. And somehow we're given agency in answering those questions. And maybe the world is so complicated that there are multiple answers to the question. Is it possible that there are different answers for different people? But whatever those questions are, it seems pretty clear that in that text, that God is enormously gracious, that judgment is not so easily given as we human beings give it, and that we're told to be at peace as we wrestle with the questions of our time. In other words, exactly the opposite of where we are right now. Go home. Go home at peace. It seems that whatever we may think of writing as a sacramental act, an act of making mystery visible, it has to have something of Elijah's response to it. Elisha's response to it. If we're going to be writers, we have to think about a complicated and gracious world. Both of those things have to be there. In addition, it seems to me that particularly writing as someone, writing for a young reader, it seems to me that it is so easy, again, particularly writing for a young reader, to not be as honest as we need to be. You can see if you are committed to totally being honest as a writer for young readers, you could quickly get into trouble or difficulties. So can I tell a story from the Holocaust to a third grade kiddo? That's a pretty hard question. Can I tell a story of lost faith to a fourth grader? Can I tell a story of terrible loss in general to a young child? Can I tell the story of Job to a kid? It's a pretty hard story. God seems pretty whimsical. There's a new translation of Job that's recently out, an amazing translation, which follows that declaration by God about, were you here when I did this? Do you remember that at the end? The response of Job in this translation is this: I pity humanity that they have a God like you. I pity humanity that they have a God like you. It seems to me, again, writing for a young reader, that part of whatever we do as writers must be nurturing and nourishing as we express this mystery. And fiction particularly is a genre that is well suited to this, really well suited to this, to talk about hard things. Other genres can do this as well, of course. And you had Marilyn Nelson here a while ago, so you know. But fiction is so good at talking about hard things because in the end, that genre, it's the main thing that it does. It's the main thing that fiction can do, to talk about hard things. Catherine Patterson has pointed out that you cannot write a short story or a novel set only in Eden. You can't. What would you say? Adam woke up. He woke up Eve. They had a cup of coffee. They went and worked on the peas. They were perfect. They went and looked at the beans. They were perfect. They rubbed the rabbit behind the ears. The rabbit was really playful today. And I could go on for quite a while, and then you would start throwing things at me because there's nothing there. There's no tension. There's no conflict. You can only tell a story when it has conflict and tension. Or to put it another way, you can only tell a story when you recognize that this is a terribly broken world and that our characters live in a broken world. And for the novelist or the short story writer, the next step is to say, how does my character make it in this broken world? How does that work? And if you think about the books that you love, think about how they often start, where there's a character in some sort of trouble, or a world in some sort of trouble. And this is the writer announcing to you, the fall has come, we're no longer in Eden. It's a hard world. It's a tough world. And often it seems to me that stories will end that way too, with the acknowledgement that my character has gotten here, has survived, and perhaps has thrived, is perhaps better equipped to deal with a hard world, but still comes back to a hard world. So, you've all probably read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. At the end of the book, well, what happens? Here are the 4 Pevensie children. They have to leave Narnia. Dang, that's pretty hard. I get it. That's a hard and sad thing. But where do they go? They go back to England. And what's happening in England when this is going on? World War II. The war is going on as they head back. That's the world they come back to. Or, and you can do this with just about any novel, go to Dickens, which is always a good place to go to. Oliver Twist. At the end of the story, he has gone through an awful time. He's been in this awful workhouse. He's been almost killed in that workhouse. He escapes that, but then is brought into a gang where he is abused. He is forced into the theft. He is starved. At one point, he's finally taken by the bad Bill Sykes. He's almost killed for that. It's been a pretty awful thing for most of that novel. At the end, the guy who turns out to be his grandfather does in fact finally get him. And we're going to live with that grandfather and also a house person there who's going to take care of him. He's going to be okay. But you have to know that Oliver is completely different at the end of the novel than he is at the beginning. He has seen the fall in his face. He has lived in an awful world where people are really, really struggling and are forced to do awful things. It's not going to be love and kisses. It's going to be a hard, hard adolescence and growth. And if you're not sure about that at the end of the book that you've read, I would suggest that you go and get a very first edition of Oliver Twist and then give it to me afterwards. And at the end of Oliver Twist, only in the first edition, there is a plate, a picture, called the Fireside Plate. It's well known. And there's Oliver, in this last picture right at the end of the book. There's Oliver sitting by the fireside. There's Grandpa sitting right next to him. Here's the sort of house matron who's sitting right next to them all. The fire is going. There's food. Everything is happy. And you just go, wow, I guess. Dickens hated it. He was incensed that that plate had appeared in the last volume, in those last pages. And he demanded that that be removed. And so it was cut out, because that's not right. It's not what Oliver is facing. It's going to be a hard world. Of course, if you do have that, you have a first edition of Oliver Twist, and you definitely want to give it to me. If you're writing for a middle grade reader, we need to be honest enough to say this is a broken world. It's not a Hallmark card where everything is going to be okay. It just isn't. It would be nice if it were, but it isn't. Let's be honest about that for our kids. I certainly learned this early in the stories that I heard as a kiddo. We had a church library that was filled with these wonderfully evangelical books. All the kids were fine by the end. I hated them. My mother tried to force me to take out books from the church library. We had big fights in the sanctuary. I thought that they were awful. But certainly the stories that I heard as a kiddo from family members and others really told me exactly this, that the world's a pretty hard place. For my father, on my father's side, it was the stories of the war that he was in. We would occasionally drive into New York City to visit Uncle Mal and Aunt Millie, and my brother and I would go up to their apartment, and my father and Uncle Mal would quickly talk about their jobs, fine, and then they would get to accounting. And those were the days in the war, when Mal was in the Army stationed on Guam, and my father was in the Navy on a supply ship. They had been best friends all their lives. And they were to be apart for the war years was agony for them. So here's the story that stays with me even now. Mal was responsible for knowing, in his position on Guam, the current position of every single ship in the Pacific Theater. He had to know where they were. The officer who was in charge above him once told Mal that if they were suddenly overwhelmed by the enemy, the very first thing he would do was to shoot Mal in the head. And Mal thought it was a joke, and then realized it wasn't. So one morning, Mal sees, because he's following all the ships, Mal sees that my father's ship is coming into Guam. He can't believe it, to supply a unit on Guam. And Mal decided that he would go and find my father so that they could at least have an hour or two together. On that time, they hadn't seen each other for well over 2 years. So Mal did everything he could to requisition a Jeep and could not get one. And so he stole a bicycle and began to cycle across Guam. Now, I love my Uncle Mal. He was not, and I'm being super kind here, he was not an athletic man. When I knew him, I couldn't even possibly imagine him on a bicycle. Nonetheless, he said, he cycled like a madman across the island and came all the way to the port on the eastern side of Guam, arriving at the dock just in time to see my father's ship heading back out to sea. He said that for the only time during the war, he stood on that dock and wept and wept. They would often tell this story back and forth, each one taking a part, and we would listen like we had never heard it before, but of course we knew it. And at the end, they would look at each other, they would laugh like horses. I mean, just laugh, this horsey laugh. And then they'd stop. Because in the end, it wasn't really a funny story. I used to often think about Mal on the dock, watching the retreating ship, my father who was stationed at the forecastle, unsure that Mal had even known that he was there, wishing he'd seen him. I think of Mal biking back across Guam, alone and lonely, all that way for nothing. And even as a kiddo, I was a sort of a memorabilia for me in a way, or a sort of an emblem for me of how it's possible to be lonely and apart, cut off by large circumstances that you're not responsible for, but that control you. On my mother's side, things were more writerly. My uncle's name was Bradford Ernest Smith, and you probably do not know that name. I'm actually certain you don't know that name. But some of you may know his work. Before Sesame Street, there were a number of live television shows for children. Remember when television was live once, believe it or not. These were shows that were aimed at a very, very young audience, and one of them was called Captain Kangaroo. Anyone remember Captain Kangaroo? Do you really? Really? My uncle wrote that show. It was on CBS in the early days. There were 6,000 performances, no kidding, 6,000 performances of Captain Kangaroo, and it extended over 29 years. 6,000 performances. My uncle was not there for all of those. It was a pastiche of cartoon and music and skits and educational bits, all featuring the captain who wore this odd naval uniform, and he had a mustache and a bowl haircut. He was, and this is a really out-of-date word, jolly. His companions were Mr. Green Jeans. He was a sort of a guy who played a hayseed farmer, and Mr. Moose, who was a big, big puppet with big antlers. He always was a step or two behind the joke. There was another animal in costume. I could never make out what it was. His name was Cosmo. He had this big round mouth, but he never spoke. The shtick that's played on most of them was that at some time in the show, there would be a bazillion ping pong balls that would fall down, just for effect. And I used to think about how it was that they would go around on the set to gather a bazillion ping pong balls at the end of the show. You cannot believe, guys, you cannot believe how much cachet there was to be in kindergarten and first grade and to tell your classmates, yeah, my my uncle writes Captain Kangaroo. It was so cool. I mean, in first grade and second grade, it wasn't so cool in high school, but it was really cool in those early grades. There was a show that came on once that told us that the character, Cosmo, that actor who had played that had died. I was stunned. I didn't know anyone who had died. I remember thinking how easy it would have been in that show to have someone else play the character. You don't see his face ever. Why not just have someone else do it? Or find some way just to eliminate Cosmo or something. But the captain, if you were on the end, you called him the captain, just saying. The captain was crying, live television, he's crying. And he came on to tell the kids who were watching, which was a whole lot, who were listening to that, he told them the story of this actor's life, told them his name, told them how he got ill. He spoke about the way he had died, who he'd left behind. The captain talked about sadness, about his sadness. But he also talked about the day when Mr. Moose would be back on, Cosmo too, ping pong balls would fall again. And I remember thinking as a kid, he's respecting me. I remember thinking that word. He was telling me the truth. And it was a hard truth, but it was true. And it wasn't just like he was giving me another skit while I was eating my Lucky Charms. He was telling me something hard. I loved him for that. I still love him for that. Several years ago, I brought a group of students up to Stratford, Ontario to see one of their plays. And we went to see The Man of La Mancha. I have to confess this to you at the beginning of the story. I am not the guy who likes musicals. They just strike me as silly. I mean, suddenly people break in. I mean, come on. But it was, it was the one that was playing, Man of La Mancha. And so we went to see it. Our trip was with English majors, mostly, but not all. Along with the English majors was one engineering major. The engineering major guy was not interested in theater. He was, however, very interested in the English major, his girlfriend, who was intrigued by theater. He went along to be with her and didn't give a rip about the plays. We did this trip on a super tight budget student thing, which means that the cheap seats are the ones that we take. And by cheap, I mean the very last thing. I mean, even telescopes are necessary to watch what's going on down here. And in a random selection of tickets, there were 3 that were up at the top, very, very far away. And it turned out that the engineering major and his girlfriend, the theater major, English major, randomly got those two of those seats. Now, she was a little bit unhappy, so far away. He was glad. He was fine. Until they realized who had the 3rd seat, which was me. You can please imagine the moment when the engineering major looks up. He's now with his girlfriend alone at the top of this theater, and I happily sit next to them. You can just imagine what that was like. At the end of the play, if you know the play, Don Quixote's had all these adventures and misadventures, and his family finds him, and they force him to come home. And he lies on what is clearly his deathbed, and they insist that he has to give up this ridiculous identity of Don Quixote that he's just assumed, and to finally speak his real family name, to come out of his madness and to speak his real name. They just demand that he speak it. What is your name? They insist. Tell us, what is your name? Say your name, speak your name. And at this moment, the engineering major who had been watching the play, because I was there, what a jerk, leans forward in his chair, and in his quietest voice, in his whisper, he says, "Say Don Quixote. Say it. Tell him your name. It's Don Quixote. Say it." But he doesn't. In the play, the character yields and he speaks his real family name instead. And this engineering major sits back, with this terrible sigh of disappointment. I tell you the truth. At that moment, I would have done the entire trip, all the work of it, all the finances, everything, for him and for him alone. Because suddenly he was pierced with this amazing thing, story. He had experienced what was going on the stage. He had seen what art can do. He had seen a form that was honest and that spoke to him. Is that not sacramental? And it doesn't matter that the musical, because it's a stupid musical, ends with Don Quixote standing up, suddenly fine. He reassumes his identity, the imagined identity. He's Lord of La Mancha. They sing the big song, and everyone claps. Fine, fine, fine. That engineering major had already seen it. He'd seen this truth, the terrible truth of a broken world that's harsh and troubled by someone that wants to be honest. And of course, writing and presenting mystery can work in reverse. It can work for the writer as well, discovering what you didn't even know you were writing about. Because God, the more that we understand, the more that we encounter, the more He's revealed, the more complex and creative He is. About a decade ago, my wife passed away on Christmas Eve. Not long before, her literary agent had accepted 3 of her manuscripts. When she passed away, I called him up and said, Rick, we're not doing this, it's over. And he said to me, Gary, we still need to do the revisions. And I said, no, we're just not doing it. And he said, well, why don't you do the revisions? You do it. And I said, I'm not going to change Anne's words. And he said, and I get that this was manipulative, he said, don't you want those words out in the world? And then he said, and this is manipulative, don't you want your grandchildren to hear her voice? And I did. I just did. So I said, okay, we'll do the revisions. I know that the day will come when I see Anne again, and she will say, Gary, it's wonderful to see you. And then she'll pull out the book and she'll go, we'll start on page 3. But okay, I'll deal with it when it comes. One of the books was called Almost Time. It was a really sweet story she'd written about a father and mother and a kiddo who were waiting for the sugar maple sap to start running. The whole book is about waiting, just waiting until the sap finally starts to run. In revisions, I took away the mother so that she's not in the book at all. And when my agent asked why I had done that, I should tell you before that Rick's 2 possible professions was to be a literary agent or a priest. He kind of is both. When he asked why, I said, I need the Father to be waiting too. And Rick said to me, what's he waiting for? I didn't have a clue. I had no idea. But the book was published anyway, and I've read it again and again, and I've done it in front of schools and things like that. And for a very long time, I didn't know. What is the Father waiting for in that book? It took years to find out, but I did. It's gratitude. He's waiting to be thankful. Thankful for the years he had, instead of just angry at the years he didn't get. Sometimes mysteries do get revealed. Augustine says about writing, should we start with beauty? And he says, yeah, that's a good place to start. Writers should do something beautiful. Then he says, should a writer also think about bringing knowledge and understanding? And he says, yeah, that's good too. And then he says, should the writer be bringing wisdom? And he says, yeah, that too. Beauty, understanding and knowledge, wisdom, all of these are things that the writer should bring to the table. And then he says this, if the writer begins there, that's completely wrong. The writer, he says, begins by asking this question: does the book serve? Does the book serve? The act of writing is a sacramental act of service to present the mystery of divinity. Specifically for a middle grade reader, it is to serve a kiddo during one of the strangest and biggest transitions of her life, middle school. Those of you who have gone through it will never want to relive it, but you remember it. And what is it that we need to send? We need to be honest, and we need to be filled with hope. So one last story. There was a rabbi, who knows where he lives. He has no congregation. He has only one job. And the job is this. Every morning he gets up. He goes out at the dawn. He watches the story of the rising sun. And when the sun comes up, he prays this prayer. Lord, let the world go on for one more day. That's the prayer. Lord, let the world go on for one more day. And this rabbi, wherever he is, prays that, and the world goes on for one more day. But should there come a day when the rabbi doesn't pray it, he's late, he's sick, whatever, and that prayer is not said, then, says this story, the world will cease to exist. The world exists on the hope that it's going to go on for one more day. That's what I think the writer, particularly a writer for young readers, is meant to say. Let the world go on for one more day. Lord, let the world go on for one more day. That's the writer who's going to write for James, whose grandfather has died, who remembers the apricot pinwheel and who will never forget it, who has found grief. That's what he needs to hear. Lord, let the world go on for one more day. It's what Tommy needs to hear. Tommy wants to be afraid and wants to be courageous and brave, but is afraid he isn't. And Genevieve, whose parents have split and who gets called names at school. For Abby, who has no respect from anyone. For J.R., who lost his friend through suicide and believes he's at fault. The world's a broken place. Writers know it. But Lord, let it go on for another day. And why should it go on for another day? Because it's a story. It's a story bound in time and with mystery at its center. And there's another page to turn now. Who knows what's going to happen next? Guys, thanks so much for coming tonight. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, Gary. And we have time for a few questions, and you can send them on that program through the QR code. They'll come up to me here. You can ask them that way. I'm going to just ask a few questions to get us started. If you want to send them in, they'll come up to me. And we'll just do this for about 15 minutes. So thank you for this beautiful talk. I want to talk to you a little bit about some areas of your life that I know about.
Okay.
So you are a writer. What most people know you for, and where you go flying around the country and giving talks, is a writer of books for children. You're also an academic with a PhD in medieval studies, medieval literature. And I'm curious where the two parts of your life ever come to touch, or whether you see these things. I mean, when I met you, you were reading me in Old English, some parts of Beowulf, and then I read Wednesday Wars, and I thought, is this the one that I had in class? Is that the same person?
Yeah.
So are there places where your love of medieval literature and everything that brought you into academia to be an academic, are there places where that touches your writing of novels, or do you go into two different parts of your brain when you do these activities?
Yeah, that is a really hard question, and I wish I had a better answer for you. I think it's the case. I'm not sure I know consciously what the connections are. I do think that there are things I gravitate to because of the writing that I do, and because of the stories that interest me in those. So, not in your year, 20 years ago, but if you had Beowulf with me, I think I would focus a whole lot more, I know I would focus a whole lot more on one of the really minor moments in there. And at the very end in Beowulf, he is called the mildest of men. And if you know the story, this is the guy that rips people's arms off, right? I mean, he's called gentle, the mildest of men, most eager to be remembered as that. And one of the questions I had as I was teaching that over and over and again is, really? How do you come up to that assessment? It's in the last lines. That's the poet's last moment to explain what Beowulf is all about. And I think it comes early in one of the stories with this character called Unferth, who is a guy who taunts Beowulf when he first comes. Beowulf is probably 14 or 15. And he taunts him and says, you think you're going to take Grendel on? You know, you weren't even able to get through this contest with Brecca. He beat you. So who are you? And Beowulf responds to him and gives him a good answer back to that, but there's a lot of tension and anger when that ends up. When Beowulf kills Grendel, he then has to go and kill Grendel's mother. And there's a scene at the pond, the mere, where Beowulf's about to jump in to go and do this. And it's Unferth, that same character, who goes to him and he says, I can't do it. I can't do it, but you can. And he hands him Hrunting, the sword, Unferth's sword. And he says, this sword has never failed. I'm giving it to you now. And Beowulf could have said, you jerk, you know, you taunted me before, but he doesn't. He takes the sword, dives down into the pond to find the Grendel's mother, and there's a battle. And he does take the sword that has never failed from Unferth, smashes it over her head, and the dang sword breaks. It breaks. It's no good at all. And so he has to search for another one, and he gets it, kills Grendel's mother, and then heads back to the surface after beheading Grendel, who's down there. When he gets up, there's Unferth. So what should he say at that moment? I mean, he should say, what a jerk you are. You gave me a sword that broke. But he doesn't. He lies. Beowulf lies. And he says, Hrunting was a great sword. I just could never get it in play. It's a direct lie. It's not true at all. That's an amazing moment. And I think years ago, Abram, I don't think I would have talked about that then. But I think one of the things of writing stories like the ones I do have made me a little more sensitive to those really small moments that show a kind of gentleness and love and a humility that are moments filled with grace that I really have picked up on a lot more. Or the end of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. I mean, here's Gawain, who is destroyed by what he's done. If you don't know the poem, I don't want to ruin it to you. He's destroyed by it. And the guy who could say to him, yeah, you should be destroyed, you should be ashamed of what you've done, says instead to him, you know what, Gawain, as a pea is to a pearl, so is every other person to you. You are that great. You are the perfect, ideal knight. Now, Gawain doesn't believe it, and he rejects that. But there's that sense that this guy is trying to say to him, no, don't be ashamed of this. What you did, don't be ashamed. You are someone who's an ideal knight. I love stuff like that, and I think I've just grown more sensitive to it because of the novels.
We have some questions from the audience. Where do your stories originate and where do they hide? In your mind, your heart, your soul, your body, all of them, where do you think of stories sort of originating?
Yeah. A lot of stories come from your past. I think a lot of people who write for young readers actually do come out of their own experience. So that doesn't mean, however, that you're doing autobiography, and it doesn't mean that you go to your children for that. The great example of that being Winnie the Pooh, which is a story obviously about Christopher Robin, who was a real son, his real son. But none of the things that happen there in the imagination are really about Christopher Robin. Everything is from A.A. Milne, the writer, the author. And to tell the story and put it on your kids is a really big mistake. Christopher Milne grew up, he's 14 years old, he's in a British boarding school, boys' boarding school. Can you imagine what they did to him? little Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh. Can you imagine what a 14, 15-year-old group of guys would do to him? He never forgave his father. His father called for him on his deathbed, and Christopher didn't come. Never forgave him. So I'm really careful about not bringing my children in. But a lot does come from your own past. Things that, or at least parts of the stories come from my own past. Wednesday Wars is, everything is true, but exaggerated, again, from my own past. So I think I would say a lot of that. And then sometimes you really just, a story comes to you, or you try and figure out some problem, or you really work at it in the sense that I know I have these characters, what's the issue that I can deal with? And sometimes that takes a long time. I'm writing a ghost story right now just because I've never done one. I'm at page 50-something. I have no idea what the problem is. I know there's a ghost. I don't know if he's good or bad. I don't know if he's a problem. I know it's set up in Maine. I know that there's 3 kids and a teacher and a stray dog. And now I'm kind of done. I don't know what else is going to go on. But I trust that it's going to come to me as it comes, and we'll see what happens. It's a mysterious thing, though, to say, where does this or that come from? You just have to trust that it will come, I suppose, and that you'll figure out the way the story should play out.
Here's another question from the audience. Can you tell us your reasoning or your purpose or the ways and the whys behind how you connect characters across books?
Oh, that was, I wish I could say that was really as purposeful as it seems today, but it wasn't. I had finished Wednesday Wars as a character, a very minor character named Doug in that one, beat-up kid. I had written some other book afterwards, and I was to the next one, and I wanted it to be completely separate of all the books. And so I started this one, and I wanted it to be a kind of beat-up kid, and I couldn't get the voice right, and you can tell right away when it doesn't work. You can just tell right away. So I tried various third persons. I tried even second person, which is stupid. I tried a number of first persons, and I couldn't make it work. And the whole time I was thinking, well, I have this other guy from this other novel. Why not do that? And in the end, it was like giving in. It really felt like giving in. And I thought, all right, let's have Doug try the story. It took 2 months. And so I put it in his voice, let him tell the story, and it sang. I can't just describe it, just seemed to sing. He was exactly the right kid. And so suddenly I have this kid from another book, and I just liked it. I enjoyed going back to that and kind of telling you what happens next, as it were. And so I've done that with a number of the books now, mostly from the kiddos in Wednesday Wars, which tends to answer some questions for readers who want to know a little bit more, but it also gives me a leg up on the novel. If I know who this character is, like Merrill Lee and just like that, I know who she is, I know why she'd want to leave or have to leave, I know something about her character, I know how she speaks. All of those things are really helpful if you're going to be writing a novel, because suddenly it's like a cheat sheet that you've got and you can work on it. And it allows me to play out some of the smaller things that were going on in her life. The actual sequel I've ever done will be out in August, and is to a book called Orbiting Jupiter. Mostly because I wrote that not long after Anne had died, and I was angry, and I can read that book today and see, oh my gosh, this is too angry at the end, and I didn't want it to end that way. So the sequel is in response in some ways to the first book. But other than that, there are these connections. The names are taken from actually Concord. You remember the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery? Mm-hmm. Way off in the corner, there's this small area, this big obelisk, and it's the Hurd family, H-U-R-D. And so in this graveyard, this is not, by the way, Sleepy Hollow like Sleepy Hollow, the Headless Horseman. That's in New York. But in this place, there is, here's Hawthorne here, and Sophia, his wife, next to him. You turn around, here's Thoreau back here. And you walk down around here, and there's Louise May Alcott is there, and you walk around here, and there's this gaudy, silly marble thingy, and that's Emerson. And there's so much attention paid there, and that's right. But way off in the corner, there are these other quiet stones, unknown for the most part. And so I like the name Hurd, so I have most of the books have a Hurd in them, a Hurd family. And I simply, literally true, I just go to that spot, and I pick out one of the kids, and that's, or one of the names, and that's the kid for this book. And it kind of gets me back there. It's sort of fun to go back, and it's sort of random, and I get that, but it's, writing, you sit at your chair, on your chair, writing by yourself, and maybe your border collie is here next to you, but it's sort of a lonely profession, so you want to do certain things that are at least somewhat fun occasionally, and that's one of them for me.
I'm going to do 3 more questions. So there's 3 questions left. You answer them as long or as short as you like.
Ooh.
The next question is a question, again, from the audience, and it has to do with your writing process. And in particular, do you have a daily habit or writing process or writing activity or discipline that allows you to keep writing or that keeps you moving in your writing?
Yeah, I'm completely German on this. I write 500 words a day on the projects that I'm working on. So this morning I got up before the school I was at, so I could make sure I got my 500 words in, because if I did it tonight, I just wouldn't do it. 500 words, that's not very much. It's about a page and a half, and I stop no matter how fast the horses are going. It doesn't matter. I stop at 500. And I know I can do 500 words every single day. I know I can make that. If I had a goal of, say, 3,000, I would miss it time and time again, and then I'm just frustrated. But I succeed every day because it's such a short amount. And as it turns out, Ernest Hemingway also wrote at that pace. John Steinbeck wrote at that pace. Jack London, who wrote more novels than any American author, wrote at 500 words a day. And for a middle grade novel, if you figure that a chapter is 20 draft pages or so, something like that, that's 2 weeks. So at the end of 2 weeks, I have a chapter, and then I can move on to the next one. Am I slow? Yeah, I'm really slow, but it's okay. I mean, Jane Yolen has 400 books out, 400 books. God bless her. But that won't be me, and I'll be fine. So yeah, that's it. 500 words a day for any given project. All
right, 2 questions left. The last one's super short, so that's you can
okay.
you can judge. And this one is it comes from me, and you'll see why immediately.
Oh man!
So in the talk, you mentioned that that's what being a Calvinist means. So I'm sort of curious if you could expand on what is Calvinism.
Oh man!
There's lots of expressions of Christianity in the world. You describe yourself as a Calvinist, which has a lot of, depending on where you're coming from in the world, has either a lot of baggage or a lot of this or a lot of that. A lot of people have perceptions. What does being a Calvinist mean to you?
I'll give you what it means to think as a writer, and just the sort of beginning of this. I went to Calvin for the job, essentially. I was a medievalist and had no idea where to go, and suddenly here's Calvin College. And I had been in a Baptist church all along. I was evangelical. If you're in that Baptist world and you say, where do you want to begin when you talk about your faith? You start with John 3:16, right? And you think about is Christ at the center of everything. And in terms of the world, the larger world around you, the metaphor we always had, and growing up in church, was this is Noah's Ark. And the church is the ark. Get on board, drag on as many people as you can. The rest of the world's going to hell. Don't worry about it. This isn't a great thing for someone who wants to be a writer. But that was really deep in me, that whole world. So coming to Calvin University now, and coming to that whole world of Calvinism opened so much for me, because it said something like this: it doesn't have to be the case that the first thing that you think about in your faith is John 3:16. What happens if you change that, shift that? Though you're not negating that, obviously, but what happens if you shift that to Genesis, and suddenly you have an emphasis on God as creator, who has enormous imaginative capabilities, who keeps saying again and again, let this happen, which is about power and authority, but then mixes that twice in the opening of Genesis with, he spoke that blessed be you, or breed and multiply, and all those sorts of things, very different. So have a blessed existence here. The imagination that's established by that It's extraordinarily powerful for me. So I did need to start with Noah's Ark, and I could in fact not have to be dominated by that metaphor. That I could say in my own Calvinist way, wow, suppose I too can participate in that imagination, that I too can create, and that what does that say about my relationship to the Lord? That somehow I am a creature who can create? That's very exciting. And that the world itself isn't something that we're throwing away, but something that we're going to cherish, and something that we're going to restore and redeem, instead of just watch it from my safe boat. That was, I can't even tell you how exciting that was for me. So I think if I was to speak about my own faith in those terms, that's where I began. I would talk about that shift going back to Genesis and thinking about what that says as God as creator and what that means for me as a writer and how it freed me up.
One of my favorite verses is Genesis 2:19, right after creation. Everything, God's finished all of creation, and the very first act is to run before Adam all that has been created. And it says there in Genesis 2:19 that God looks on to see what he will name them.
Oh, yeah.
And so the language that has just been used to make creation, the very first thing God does with it is he loans it to Adam to use and to name creation.
Yeah, use your imagination.
W.H. Auden, who's the great poet of the 20th century, said that's the start of all poetry. That moment, that line, because poetry is the art of naming, he said, and that was the beginning of all poetry.
That's good.
Last question, very simple, very short. What's your favorite book?
If you can find it, that'd be really wonderful. It's Giovanni Guarasci, and the book is called The Little World of Don Camillo. If you were in my study right now, right in the center of all the books that are lining the front of the desk or back of the desk, Origin of the Species, Darwin, greatest writer of the 19th century. His language is unbelievable. And right beside that is The Little World of Don Camillo. I read from both every day before I start writing. Since it's so hard to find, I'll just tell you really quickly. It's written right after World War II. Don Camillo is a priest, obviously, and he's in a tiny town in Italy. His enemy, his arch enemy, is Poponi, who is a communist mayor. So you have the priest of this parish church versus this communist mayor. They turned out to be exactly alike, almost physically as well, and both passionately devoted to their own belief systems. What Don Camillo has, however, is that in the front of the church, Catholic Church, is Christ on the cross, and the conversations that he has with Christ on the cross are hysterically funny. And for a kiddo who was a Baptist, that kind of verges on irreverence, which made it even better. And to watch him play out all the difficulties that he's having in this post-war Italy by speaking with Christ on this, in this funny, irreverent way, it is still freeing to me. The imagination is fantastic. He wrote about 6 or 7 other books that followed it, Don Camillo here, Don Camillo there. They all stink. But that first one, if you can get it, The Little World of Don Camillo, is absolutely brilliant. And you'll cry all the way through it. You'll laugh. I'm not going to tell you the ending, but it is the perfect ending of all the world's literature. Okay, fine. Of most of the world's literature, it is absolutely pitch perfect. And you'll close the book and you'll go, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Anyway, so that's what I would choose.
There's a phrase in my life that's a Gary Schmidt phrase.
Oh no.
And when something really good happens, I think I was with you once when a Newbery honor was announced or something.
Yeah.
And your phrase came out. Something really good happens, and you'll stand there for a moment and you'll say, that'll do.
That'll do.
That'll do.
Yeah.
Gary, that'll do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If we could all thank Gary.
No.
And I believe you're signing?
Yeah.
Over here. So there's books to be purchased and signing to be had just over here around the corner. And thank you all for coming this evening. It's a really delight to have you all out here.